In this tutorial, I want to show you how to understitch. So I'm working on the Evelyn, and I've done the main and the lining, put those two together on the front bodice. And you can see the V neckline right here. And I like to understitch on the lining just because it allows the lining not to be shown on the outside when it's being worn. So it just stabilizes that seam allowance a little bit, and it prevents the lining from rolling onto the front. So here I've went ahead and marked where I want to begin to understitch and end understitch, and I just did that with a blue marker, the fabric pens. This is just, the ties are so narrow in the opening, so that's not really possible to understitch all the way up. But this is the most important part anyway, the V neckline. So let's go ahead and start understitching. I like to open up my lining and my main fabric, and as I'm opening it up, go ahead and pick up this seam allowance and make sure that that is pointing to the lining part, because when you're understitching, you're going to catch that seam allowance in there, and that's what's going to enable it the seam not to roll over. So let's go ahead and push that seam allowance to the lining, and then put it into our machine. Here we go. It's going to be a little bit fiddly there. But you can do this because it's really neat. The outcome is really amazing. It just gives you a professional finish, and I love that. Okay, so I see that blue dot right there. If you can see that, there you go. You're starting at that blue dot. I like to stitch about 1/8 of an inch or 1/16 of an inch away from the seam allowance. All right, so I've got that position there. You're always going to understitch on the lining. So, and of course, we're gonna go ahead and pick up the piece there, and notice that the seam allowance is pointing towards the lining part. All right. As we begin, I like to backstitch in the beginning, and I'll backstitch at the end as well. And you're just gonna go ahead and follow your seam allowance, that line there. You're gonna come to that V, which is right here where that seam allowance is on the main, and you're gonna pivot, continuing to make sure that seam allowance is pointing to the lining. You're just gonna keep on going all the way down, or not all the way down, but towards the other blue dot that you made. And just take it slow on this. It tends to be a little bit better if you do. And then keep on going to that blue dot right there, if you can see that. And I like to backstitch again right there. Okay. It's just a little bit of a stitch, it's not much. So that V is not a long V, but it's just right there at the neckline. And then, so this is the lining part. You can see the stitches there. And on the face, on the main part, there's no stitches. That is awesome. And then if we look underneath, we'll see that the seam allowance was caught up in the understitching. That's perfect. It's pointing towards the lining part. That is perfect. Great job. You did it.